So we're going to start it right here in this picture that we'd left off in the last video. This is again the Paris conference, the Paris Peace Conference. This is in a big salon in the Treaty of Versailles. So if you ever go to Versailles, a big hall in the Palace of Versailles. So if you ever go to the Palace of Versailles, you can see where this room is. It's quite interesting. I went there a few years ago and got to see it. So let's go and let's see, what did the guys decide here? So what was the impact of the peace treaty on Germany up to 1923? Terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So go ahead and write this down. I'm going to the next slide. Come with me when you're ready. So Germany had to accept the war guilt clause. What is the war guilt clause? Well, it's Article 231. You need to memorize that article number as well as the name. You will see both of them on the test. The good news is you only see Article 231. You don't see like an Article 258 or so. As long as you recognize it, you're okay. Better though if you can memorize it so you can say it again, because it gives you extra points if you use both words, war guilt clause and clause 231. And it basically said Germans had to accept all the blame of the war. It's all Germany's fault. Okay? So the first thing you think is, what? No, what happened to Austria? What happened to Hungary? I mean, hello, Austro-Hungarian Empire, So the Archduke Franz Ferdinand that was, killed by the Black Hand, hello, it's not Germany's fault. Well, actually, when they signed the Treaty of Versailles, Germans were saying it was their fault. And surprise, surprise, it was particularly hated by the Germans, and they felt that, the blame should be shared between everyone else. And you probably feel that as well. So if you think about it, kind of what I was saying about Italy and Japan in the last video, if you don't praise somebody for helping you, maybe they'll leave. And if you put too much blame on somebody and don't share the blame, that also makes people bad or mad. So, not very good, this war guilt clause. So pause if you need to. If not, we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, this is a lot of memorization, a lot of numbers, but you need to learn that Germany was forced to disarm. Okay, the first thing you need to learn about is that they abolished conscription. So what is conscription? Conscription means that you have to mandatorily go into the military. Okay, so if there's no conscription, that means that you didn't have to mandatorily go. But also, if you notice, the army is reduced up to 100,000, which means not actually that many people could join anyway. So those two kind of work hand in hand. It limited its navy to 24 ships with no submarines, and there was no air force. Okay, there was no armored vehicles, submarines, or aircrafts. So an armored vehicle, normally you think of a tank when you think of an armored vehicle, but there are other vehicles that they can put armor, and there was none of that whatsoever. That's why they didn't say no tanks, because they didn't want them to take other things that weren't tanks and armor them. And another thing is the demilitarized zone. And the demilitarized zone was set up in the Rhineland. So the Rhineland is the area between France and Germany, where the Rhine River goes, and no military was allowed to be there whatsoever, either German or French. We'll be talking a lot more about all of these points in chapter 3 when we talk about Hitler. So what is the reaction to the Germans? Well, of course they're going to think it's unfair. They say, hey, we're a huge country. There's no way that we can protect ourselves with so little amount of people. And so, of course, the big three are thinking, well, you can't protect yourself, but you can't also, harm us. So that's why they did it. And it was particularly disliked because one of Wilson's 14 points is that everyone should disarm. But it's only Germany that disarmed. This also becomes a huge sticking point in the League of Nations, which we'll talk about later in chapter 2. Okay, if you are not done copying, pause the video. If not, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, they had to pay reparations. And again, we've said the word reparations many times before, but let me repeat it. Reparations is the amount of money that you have to pay and things and goods that you pay in order for the damage that you caused when you fought in a war. And Germany had to pay $6.6 billion. As you can see on the bottom right, it says reparations $55 million dollars. Okay, well, or $55 billion. That's dollars there, and I think I might have said this wrong up top. It's 6.6 billion pounds. So I think I said dollar a couple times, but make sure you memorize it's pounds, 6.6 billion pounds. You also see this number as $6,600 million, or million pounds. Again, pounds is the one you want to use. Don't use dollars, the numbers are very different, and so they want this poundage number. Okay, so that was going to take Germany forever to pay off. In fact, they estimated that they wouldn't pay it off until 1984. And so later it was reduced under the Young Plan. Now, it doesn't say how much it was reduced to. I've searched and I could never find how much it was reduced to. So just know that it was reduced. Okay? So I don't think they wanted to actually divulge how much that was. So, what was the reaction of the Germans? Surprise, surprise, they were not too happy with it. Okay? They did not want to pay for all this war damage. Their economy was already weakened. They couldn't afford to pay for it. And worse is the next slide. When you're ready, we can move on to that. So take a pause. Okay? Finish this, and then I will finish my sentence, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So pause right now. Okay, so they didn't want to pay all of this money because their economy was weak, and so much of their land was taken away from them, that they couldn't even produce things. So really quick before I go into this map, a lot of this area right here and right here is where they produced a lot of their goods. This were their factories, their industrial areas. And when they lose these areas, they can't even pay that money back. Okay, so now up to the territory loss. They lost 13% of its territories. Okay, so you basically have to memorize all of these, and I'll go around the map and explain them to you. But really, you do need to memorize them. There's not a lot of times I say you really have to memorize this point, but just, get all of these terms totally memorized from these notes. So if we start with Alsace-Lorraine. Alsace-Lorraine was given back to France. This area has Strasbourg in it, so if you've ever been to that area of France, it's right next to Germany near Stuttgart. Here's Stuttgart over here. Then you will see that area looks rather German. That's because it belonged to Germany for the longest time. It was France, then it was German, and now it's France again. But most of the buildings and everything are very German. Okay, then the North Schleswig was given to Denmark. But they had a vote for it. They had a plebiscite. You're going to see this word plebiscite a lot. No one knows what it means, so let me explain. A pleb is a person. So if you've ever heard you plebs, if you've ever heard people say that either in a meme or in one of your games, a pleb is a person, and it's a common person, not a royal person. So we're all plebs. So a plebiscite is a vote by the plebs. So a vote for the people. It's just a fancy word for a vote by the people. So plebiscite. You guys will be, you'll be learning it, so I don't see that we've got it written down, but if you want to write it down to help you remember now, you can. But if not, we'll just come back and get it. So Danzig. Danzig is a city that belonged to Germany. It was turned into a free city. It was run by the League of Nations. It was not owned by any country, but it was a seaport that Poland was supposed to use. So right here. Now here's something in the Treaty of Versailles I think they did really, really weird. They have this Polish corridor right here. And so basically they took Germany, split it in half. We got Germany here, and the only way to get to the Germany is to go through Poland. Like that's not going to cause problems. So anyway, this part right here, West Prussia and Posen, was given to Poland. East Prussia stayed with Germany. This is not really in your notes, but this part right here was given to Lithuania right here. So it looks like that I have missed this right here, so I'm going to scooch back to talk about the Saar. So the Saar is this little area right here. It is also run by the League of Nations. So you've got the Saar and Danzig that are both run by the League of Nations. Now in the Saar, 15 years later, so that's in the mid-30s, they're going to have a plebiscite. And I just told you what plebiscite is, so go ahead and take a second to think, what is a plebiscite? Remember, a plebiscite is a vote of the plebs, of the people. Okay, so 15 years after they wrote the Treaty of Versailles, they took a vote to decide, is it going to belong to France or Germany? And I will not give you the spoiler alert. You're just going to have to wait till chapter 3 to find out who has the Tsar. Okay, so I talked about Danzig, and I talked about Poland giving the Polish corridor. Then Upper Sicily, I've already kind of told you about it. That's where a lot of industrial areas are. They were given to Poland. And all of the colonies of Germany had to be given to either Britain or France or other people. But basically, this was against Wilson's 14 points of the self-determination. They couldn't choose where they wanted to go. So this is one of, like I say, Wilson's really big annoyances. And another thing is we have Anschluss. There is no Anschluss between Austria and Germany. And you being German, if you understood my accent, that was a German word, Anschluss, which means, coming together, being together. Okay? And so Germany and Austria were forbidden to have that union. Now, some of the cool things about being German speakers is you occasionally get to write German words on your test, and then the graders think, ooh, wow, so cool, he's using the proper German word. So Anschluss is one that you would use. So there is no Anschluss between Germany and Austria. We'll talk a lot more about that later in chapter 3. So, what is Germany's reaction? Again, surprise, surprise. It is a huge blow to their pride. All of these German people are going to somewhere else. So these are like all of these little orange areas. Germans live there. German-speaking people. And so this area, you're living in Germany, and suddenly you're living in France. You're like, I didn't move. But your borders changed. And so that's going to be huge. One of the things that Hitler is going to do is try to reunite all the German-speaking people. And so also what we already talked about is Saar and the Upper Sicilia were important industrial areas. You take these areas away, they don't have any money. How on earth is Germany going to repay those reparations? Okay, so our next slide. Pause if you need to write that down. If not, we're going to go on to the next slide. Okay, and finally the League of Nations is set up. Okay, so the League of Nations is a police-keeping force. This is one of Wilson's 14 points. Germany was not invited until it could show to be peaceful. The whole chapter 2 is called the League of Nations, so I'm not actually going to talk about anything more, so you can just finish copying down these notes. Okay, and so when you're ready, we'll go on to the next slide. And that is your homework. And I will create another video explaining what the homework is.